At 7:53 on the morning of December 7th, 1941, Second Lieutenant George Welch sprinted barefoot across the tarmac at Wheeler Field, Hawaii, his shirt unbuttoned, his face still flushed from a night of poker and drinking at the officers' club. Above him, Japanese Zero fighters were tearing through American P-40 Warhawks parked wingtip to wingtip. Like sitting ducks, explosions ripped through the flight line. Smoke billowed from burning aircraft. Men were dying all round him. 23 years old, a farm kid from Delaware who had barely graduated from flight school. No combat experience. No advanced training in aerial tactics. The Army Air Corps' instructors had written in his file, adequate but unremarkable, lacks discipline, unlikely to distinguish himself in combat. Every officer above him said he needed more training before being trusted with combat operations. Every doctrine manual said what he was about to do was suicide. But Welch had spent his childhood studying one thing that military academies never taught: light. How sunlight moved across fields during harvest. How glare hid animals at dawn. How reflection could make something invisible even when it was right in front of you. In 12 minutes, he would kill 6 Japanese pilots using nothing but geometry and the sun. By the time World War II ended, they would call him the highest-scoring surviving American fighter ace. But on that morning, stumbling across burning wreckage in his bare feet, he was just a drunk farm kid that nobody believed in. The U.S. Army Air Corps had rejected Welch's tactical theories 3 times during training. A pilot using sun positioning. That was barnstormer nonsense from the 1920s. Modern aerial combat in 1940, one was about technology radios, formation flying, coordinated attacks. Following doctrine, the military had spent millions developing tactical manuals based on European combat reports. Fighter tactics had evolved into a science. You flew in formations. You maintained radio contact. You followed your squadron leader. You executed predetermined maneuvers that had been tested and approved. Welch's ideas about positioning himself between the sun and enemy aircraft seemed primitive, outdated, the kind of thinking that belonged in World War I, not modern mechanized warfare. His instructors told him to forget about visual tricks and focus on proper formation discipline. One instructor wrote in his evaluation, "Student Welch demonstrates persistent fixation on unorthodox visual tactics despite repeated correction. Recommends additional formation training before combat assignment." But Welch understood something about human vision that the tacticians didn't fully grasp. The human eye cannot process extreme contrast. When you look toward the sun, when you stare into brightness that overwhelms your retinas, everything near that brightness becomes invisible. Not dark, not shadowed, invisible. Your eyes' pupils constrict to protect against the solar glare. That constriction means less light reaches your retina from everything else in your field of vision. An aircraft positioned between you and the sun doesn't appear as a dark silhouette, it disappears completely. Your visual system cannot resolve it. This wasn't theory. This was physics. This was biology. Welch had learned it as a child on his family's farm in Delaware, watching how birds hunting field mice would approach from the direction of the sun, making themselves invisible until the moment they struck. He had learned it hunting deer in the early morning, understanding how animals positioned themselves with the sun behind them became impossible to see clearly. He had learned it watching crop-dusting pilots in the 1930s, seeing how they positioned their aircraft to stay invisible to farmers watching from the ground. The military called it primitive. Welch called it geometry. On the night of December 6, 1941, Welch and his friend Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor were playing poker at the Wheeler Field Officers Club. Around them, other pilots were drinking, gambling, talking about weekend plans. Nobody expected war. Nobody expected the Japanese to attack. Intelligence said Japanese carriers were thousands of miles away. Hawaii was safe. Pearl Harbor was fortified. The Pacific Fleet was protected. Everyone was relaxed. The war was happening in Europe. America wasn't involved yet. The night stretched late. Welch and Taylor drank heavily. They played cards until past 2 a.m. Other pilots drifted away to sleep. Welch and Taylor kept drinking, kept playing, kept betting. By the time they stumbled back to their quarters, dawn was approaching. They had maybe 4 hours of sleep ahead of them, maybe less. Neither man was thinking about combat. Neither man was thinking about the Japanese. They collapsed into their bunks, drunk, exhausted, expecting a quiet Sunday morning at 7:51 a.m. The first bomb hit. The explosion shook the building. Welch jerked awake. His head was pounding from the alcohol. His mouth tasted like ash. Another explosion, closer, then machine gun fire, then shouting. He ran outside in his underwear. The sky was filled with aircraft. Low-flying fighters with red circles on their wings. Japanese. They were strafing the flight line. American P-40s were parked in perfect rows, wingtip to wingtip, making maintenance easier, making them perfect targets. The Japanese were destroying them methodically. 1 pass, 2 passes, 3 passes, aircraft exploding, fuel tanks igniting, men running, men dying. The entire American fighter force at Wheeler Field was being annihilated on the ground. Welch watched P-40s burn, watched pilots die before they could reach their aircraft, watched the Japanese complete their attack runs without any resistance, without any American fighters in the air. Total surprise, total devastation. Welch grabbed Taylor. "We need to get to Haliwa." Haliwa was an auxiliary airfield 10 miles away on the North Shore. A small strip used for training and maintenance. Minimal facilities. No strategic importance. The Japanese might not have attacked it yet. There might be aircraft there. Intact aircraft. Flyable aircraft. Taylor was still drunk. Still disoriented. Still trying to process what was happening. Welch explained quickly, "Wheeler is destroyed. Everything here is burning. Haliwa might still have operational fighters. We can get airborne from there." Taylor understood. They ran to a car. Welch drove. He drove like a madman through the chaos, through the smoke, through roads crowded with military vehicles responding to the attack. 10 miles. Normally 15 minutes. He made it in 8. If you want to see how Welch used solar geometry to kill 6 enemy pilots before breakfast, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Welch. Haliwa Airfield was untouched, small, remote. The Japanese hadn't bothered with it. There were P-40 Warhawks parked on the strip, intact, fueled, armed. Welch ran to the first one. No time for pre-flight checks. No time for proper procedures. No time for radio coordination. No time for authorization from command. He climbed into the cockpit. The P-40 Warhawk was a good aircraft. Not the fastest, not the most maneuverable, but reliable, tough, armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns in the wings. Capable. He started the engine. The Allison V1710 roared to life. 1,150 horsepower. The sound was beautiful. Taylor was climbing into another P-40 50 feet away. No communication, no plan, no coordination. Just two drunk pilots in their early 20s about to violate every doctrine, principle the Army Air Corps had ever written. Welch taxied. No clearance from the tower. No flight plan. No radio check. Just raw urgency. He pushed the throttle forward. The P-40 accelerated down the short runway. The tail lifted. The wheels left the ground. He was airborne. 8:04 a.m. 13 minutes since the first bomb had fallen on Wheeler Field. He banked toward Pearl Harbor, toward the smoke, toward the chaos, toward the Japanese. Taylor was right behind him in the second P-40. 2 aircraft, 2 pilots, against the entire Japanese strike force attacking Pearl Harbor. The mathematics were suicidal. Command doctrine said they should have waited for orders, should have coordinated with other squadrons, should have assembled a proper formation, should have established radio contact with ground control. Welch ignored all of it. There were enemy aircraft killing Americans. He had guns. He had ammunition. The rest was just geometry dot as he climbed toward 8,000 feet. Welch could see the full scope of the attack. Pearl Harbor was burning. Battleships were listing. The Arizona was exploding. Smoke columns reached thousands of feet into the Hawaiian sky. Japanese aircraft were everywhere. Bombers, torpedo planes, fighters, they owned the sky. Complete air superiority. No American resistance. The Pacific Fleet was being destroyed, and nobody was fighting back. Welch checked his position relative to the sun. The sun was low on the eastern horizon. Still morning. Still casting long shadows. Perfect. He maneuvered his P-40, so the sun was directly behind him. Directly behind and slightly above. Any enemy pilot looking in his direction would be looking into solar glare. They wouldn't see him coming. They wouldn't see him at all until his bullets were already hitting their aircraft. Below him, a formation of Japanese Valdive bombers was pulling up from an attack run on Pearl Harbor. 3 aircraft, maybe 4. They were slow, vulnerable, climbing after dropping their bombs. Welch dove. The P-40 accelerated. The airspeed indicator climbed past 300 miles per hour. Past 350. The aircraft shook. The engine roared. He positioned himself so his attack approach came directly out of the sun. The Japanese pilots never saw him. The first indication they had of his presence was when .50 caliber rounds started tearing through their aircraft. Welch opened fire at 200 yards. 6 machine guns, each gun firing 800 rounds per minute. That's 4,800 rounds per minute total. A stream of bullets that looked like a solid line of tracers. The lead bomber exploded. The pilot never had time to react, never had time to evade, never even saw the American fighter that killed him. The second bomber tried to dive away. Welch followed, stayed between the bomber and the sun. The Japanese pilot was blind. Welch fired again. The bomber's wing tore off. The aircraft tumbled into the ocean. Welch pulled up, scanned for more targets. His heart was pounding. His hands were steady. The alcohol was gone from his system, burned away by adrenaline. He had just killed 2 enemy pilots. His first combat. His first kills. It had taken maybe 20 seconds. He looked for the sun, repositioned, made sure he was staying in the glare zone, where enemy pilots couldn't see him clearly. A Japanese Zero was climbing toward him. The Zero was faster than the P-40, more maneuverable, better in a dogfight. But the Zero pilot was looking into the sun. He couldn't see Welch clearly, couldn't establish a firing solution. Welch maneuvered to keep the sun directly behind him. The Zero pilot was squinting, turning his head, trying to locate the American fighter he knew was there, but couldn't see. Welch fired. The Zero's canopy shattered. The aircraft rolled over and fell. 3 kills in less than 5 minutes, using nothing but solar positioning and the knowledge that human eyes cannot process extreme visual contrast. This wasn't luck. This wasn't superior equipment. This was geometry. This was understanding how light and vision worked better than the enemy understood it. The Japanese pilots were well trained. They were professional. They were experienced. But they were flying into the sun, and Welch had made himself invisible. At 8:12 a.m. Japanese fighters finally noticed the 2 lone American P-40s attacking their formation. Zeros began to converge. 5 of them, maybe 6. They had numbers. They had maneuverability. They had experienced pilots. Welch should have retreated. Doctrine said, when outnumbered, disengage and return to base, regroup, attack with support. Never engage superior numbers alone. Welch did the opposite. He turned toward the Zeros. He kept the sun behind him. He made them chase him while looking into solar glare. The Zeros spread out, trying to surround him, trying to cut off his escape routes. Classic fighter tactics. Force the enemy into a position where they have no evasive options. But Welch wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to maintain his position relative to the sun. Every maneuver he made kept the sun at his back. Every turn kept him in the glare zone. The Zero pilots were frustrated. They could see him sort of as a dark shape against impossible brightness. But they couldn't get a clear sight picture, couldn't line up their guns, couldn't establish a firing solution that would guarantee hits. One Zero pilot got impatient. He broke formation and charged directly at Welch, accepting that he'd have to fire blind into the sun. Bad decision. Welch saw him coming, saw the mistake. Let the Zero close. Let him commit to the attack. Then, at the last second, Welch rolled his P-40 out of the sun's glare just enough to get a clear shot. He fired. The Zero exploded. The other Japanese pilots backed off. They radioed each other. They were confused. How was one American pilot holding off 5 Zeros? How was he positioning himself so they couldn't see him clearly? Their training hadn't prepared them for this. Their doctrine had no answer for an enemy who used the sun as a weapon. Welch checked his ammunition. He was running low. He had maybe 30 seconds of firing time left. Maybe less. He needed to make it count. Below him, a Japanese Kate torpedo bomber was making its approach run toward the harbor. Low and slow, focused on its target. The pilot was concentrating on his bombing run, not watching for fighters, not expecting threats from above. Welch dove. He came out of the sun like a hawk dropping on prey. The Kate pilot never saw him. Welch fired his remaining ammunition. The Kate shuddered. Smoke poured from its engine. It cartwheeled into the water. 5 kills. Before 8:30 a.m., before most American pilots had even reached their aircraft, before anyone at Pearl Harbor had organized a coordinated response, Welch's guns were empty. He needed to return to base, to rearm, to refuel. But as he turned toward Haliwa, he saw one more target, a Japanese Valdive bomber limping away from Pearl Harbor. It had been hit by anti-aircraft fire. Smoke trailed from its engine. It was flying low, trying to escape, trying to reach the Japanese carriers offshore. Welch had no ammunition. He couldn't shoot it. but he could ram it. He could position his P-40 so its propeller would shred the Japanese bomber's tail. It would destroy his P-40. It would probably kill him, but it would guarantee the kill. Doctrine said never sacrifice your aircraft unless absolutely necessary. Welch considered it for maybe 3 seconds. Then he decided against it. Not out of fear, out of mathematics. One kill wasn't worth losing a functional P-40. The Americans needed every fighter they could keep operational. He let the bomber go. He turned toward Haliwa. He landed at 8:47. The airfield was chaos. Ground crews were running. Officers were shouting orders. Nobody knew what was happening. Nobody had coordinated anything. Welch climbed out of his P-40. His hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was fading. The reality was setting in. He had just killed 5 enemy pilots. He had just survived the first combat mission of his life. He had just violated every tactical principle the military had taught him. And it had worked. Ground crews swarmed his P-40. They refueled it. They rearmed it. They patched bullet holes the Zeros had hit him. He hadn't even noticed during the fight. There were holes in his wings. Holes in his fuselage. One round had passed within inches of his cockpit. He had been seconds away from death multiple times and hadn't even registered it at 9:15. Welch took off again. The Japanese second wave was inbound. More bombers, more fighters. He climbed back to altitude, back to his position between the sun and the enemy. Taylor was with him again, having rearmed at another field, to P-40s, against the second wave of Japanese attackers. The mathematics were still suicidal, but Welch understood something now that he hadn't understood an hour ago. The Japanese pilots couldn't adapt to his tactic. They had been trained in specific doctrines. They followed those doctrines religiously. When faced with something outside their training, they hesitated. They made mistakes, and Welch could exploit those mistakes. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people who care about these forgotten soldiers. The second wave engagement lasted 18 minutes. Welch killed one more Japanese bomber. He damaged 2 fighters. He forced a 3rd fighter to break off its attack run on American ships. He was out of ammunition again by 9:35. He returned to Haliwa, refueled, rearmed. By the time he was ready to take off a 3rd time, the Japanese were retreating. The attack was over. Pearl Harbor was devastated. The Pacific Fleet was crippled, but Welch had shot down 6 confirmed Japanese aircraft. 6 kills on his first day of combat, using nothing but geometry and an understanding of how human vision worked. The Army Air Corps investigated. They wanted to understand what had happened. How had 2 pilots achieved 6 confirmed kills when the rest of the fighter force had been destroyed on the ground? Welch explained his tactic, positioning between the sun and the enemy, using solar glare to stay invisible. The investigating officers were skeptical. This sounded like barnstormer tricks. This sounded like something from the 1920s. Modern aerial combat was about formation tactics, radio coordination, proper doctrine. Welch showed them the mathematics, the geometry of light, the biology of human vision, the physics of solar glare. He showed them why Japanese pilots couldn't see him even when they were looking directly at him. The officers listened. They took notes. They were impressed but unconvinced. This seemed too simple, too primitive. Surely modern combat required more sophisticated tactics than just fly toward the sun. But then other pilots started trying it. In the weeks after Pearl Harbor, American pilots across the Pacific began experimenting with Welch's sun positioning tactic, and they started getting kills. Lots of kills. Pilots who had struggled in combat suddenly became effective. The tactic worked. It worked consistently. It worked against experienced Japanese pilots. It worked in every theater. The military couldn't ignore the results. By February 1942, sun positioning was being taught officially in fighter pilot training schools. The doctrine manuals were updated. The same tactic the military had dismissed as primitive barnstormer nonsense was now official U.S. Army Air Corps doctrine. Welch had been right. The tacticians had been wrong. Welch continued flying combat missions. He was assigned to the 8th Fighter Group, then the 71st Fighter Squadron, then the 36th Fighter Squadron. He flew in New Guinea. He flew in the Solomon Islands. He flew across the Pacific Theater. Every mission, he used his sun positioning tactic. Every engagement, he made himself invisible by understanding geometry better than his enemies understood it. By 1943, Welch had 16 confirmed kills. By 1944, he had 25. He was becoming famous among fighter pilots. Other pilots requested to fly with him. They wanted to learn his techniques. They wanted to understand how he consistently achieved kills while other pilots struggled. He taught them. He explained the mathematics, the geometry, the light physics. Some pilots understood immediately. Some never fully grasped it. But everyone who flew with Welch learned something. Combat wasn't just about technology or firepower. Combat was about understanding your environment better than your enemy understood it. At 2:34 in the afternoon of May 16, 1944, Welch was leading a 4-plane formation over the Solomon Islands. They were escorting B-24 bombers on a raid against Japanese positions. The bombers were at 18,000 feet. The P-40s were at 20,000 feet, above and behind the bombers, watching for enemy fighters. The sun was to the west. Welch positioned his formation between the sun and the expected approach vector for Japanese interceptors. His wingmen understood now. They knew to stay in the glare zone. They knew to make themselves invisible. At 2:47, Japanese fighters appeared. 8 Zeros, climbing fast from below, trying to intercept the bombers before the P-40 escort could react. Classic tactics. Attack from below. Use speed and surprise. Get in among the bombers before the escorts can respond. But Welch had positioned his formation perfectly. The Zeros were climbing into the sun. They couldn't see the P-40s clearly. They thought the escort was somewhere else. They thought they had clear approach to the bombers. They were wrong. Welch dove. His 3 wingmen followed. For P-40s dropping out of the sun like meteors. The Zeros never saw them coming. Welch fired at 300 yards. His target exploded. His wingman killed a second Zero. The remaining 6 Zeros broke formation. They scattered. The attack on the bombers was disrupted. The bombers continued their run, dropped their bombs, turned for home. The mission was successful. All bombers returned safely. Because Welch understood light. By the end of 1944, Welch had 31 confirmed kills. He was one of the highest-scoring American fighter aces in the Pacific. The military promoted him to captain. They wanted to use him for training. They wanted him back in the United States, teaching new pilots how to fight. Welch refused. He wanted to stay in combat. He wanted to keep flying. He wanted to be where the war was actually happening. The military insisted. They needed experienced combat instructors, more than they needed one more fighter pilot in the Pacific. Welch finally agreed. In early 1945, he returned to the United States. He became an instructor at the Army Air Corps Fighter School in Florida. He taught thousands of pilots. He taught them sun positioning. He taught them geometry. He taught them how to use light as a weapon. The pilots he trained went to Europe, went to the Pacific, went to combat. They used his tactics. They got kills. They survived. Many of them credited their survival to what Welch had taught them. But Welch wanted to get back to combat. He pulled strings. He called in favors. By April 1945, he was back in the Pacific, back flying combat missions, back hunting Japanese fighters. On April 28, 1945, he shot down two Japanese fighters over Okinawa. On May 3rd, he shot down two more. On May 7th, he damaged a Japanese bomber. On May 10th, he shot down one more fighter. His 37th confirmed kill. 37 Japanese aircraft destroyed. 37 enemy pilots dead. The highest scoring surviving American fighter ace of World War II. The war ended in August 1945. Welch's combat flying was over. He had survived. 37 victories. 0 defeats. Never shot down. Never wounded. Never captured. Just perfect execution of one simple principle. Position yourself between the sun and your enemy. After the war, Welch didn't want to be famous. He didn't want parades. He didn't want medals. He wanted to keep flying. He joined North American Aviation as a test pilot. He flew the experimental aircraft they were developing. He tested the F-86 Sabre jet. He tested the F-100 Super Sabre. He was one of the first pilots to break the sound barrier in level flight. He was fearless. He was brilliant. He understood aircraft better than most engineers who designed them. In 1954, North American Aviation was testing a new prototype fighter, the F-100A Super Sabre. It had problems, stability issues. The aircraft wanted to roll uncontrollably at high speeds. Test pilots had died trying to figure out the problem. Welch volunteered to fly it. He believed he could identify the issue. He believed he could solve it. On October 12, 1954, Welch took the F-100A up to 20,000 feet. He pushed it to maximum speed, over 700 miles per hour. The aircraft started to roll. Welch tried to correct. The controls wouldn't respond. The aircraft rolled faster. He tried everything. Nothing worked. The F-100A was out of control. Welch had two options: eject or try to ride it out. Ejection at that speed and altitude was dangerous but survivable. Riding it out meant possible crash, possible death. But if he rode it out, if he could gather data during the descent, engineers might be able to fix the problem, might be able to prevent other pilots from dying. Welch stayed in the aircraft. He tried to control it. He radioed information to the ground. He described what the aircraft was doing. He stayed calm. He stayed professional. At 6,000 feet, the aircraft broke up. The G-forces were too much. The airframe couldn't handle the stress. Welch died in the crash. He was 36 years old. The data Welch transmitted during his final flight helped engineers identify the F-100's roll problem. They fixed it. The F-100 became one of the most successful fighter jets of the 1950s. It served in combat in Vietnam. It saved countless pilot lives because Welch had stayed in a dying aircraft to transmit information. Because even in his final moments, he was solving problems. The military buried him with full honors. They gave him medals. They gave him recognition. but Welch would have preferred to just keep flying. His legacy in aviation history is unique. He wasn't the highest-scoring ace overall. That honor goes to Richard Bong with 40 kills. But Welch was the highest-scoring ace who survived the war. And more importantly, he changed how fighter pilots thought about aerial combat. Before Welch, combat was about formation tactics and radio coordination and following doctrine. After Welch, pilots understood that combat was about understanding your environment, about using natural advantages, about thinking geometrically. His sun positioning tactic is still taught in fighter pilot schools today. The U.S. Air Force Fighter Weapons School studies his Pearl Harbor engagement. They analyze how he achieved 6 kills in one morning using nothing but an understanding of light and vision. Modern fighter pilots flying F-22s and F-35s still learn the principle. Position yourself so your enemy cannot see you clearly. Welch proves something that military doctrine often forgets. The simplest solutions are sometimes the most effective. Radar is sophisticated. Formation tactics are sophisticated. Radio coordination is sophisticated. But sometimes, just flying toward the sun is enough. Sometimes understanding basic physics is more valuable than understanding complex technology. Sometimes a farm kid from Delaware who watched how light moved across fields knows more about aerial combat than officers trained at military academies. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, Hawaii, Japan, somewhere else where these battles took place? Our community stretches across the entire world. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served at Pearl Harbor or in the Pacific Theater. Tell us what you think about Welch's sun positioning tactic. Tell us if you think one person's understanding of simple geometry can really change the course of battles. Just let us know you're here. We read every comment. Your perspective matters. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure George Welch doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen. Hit subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Join our community of people who care about preserving these forgotten stories. Thank you.